Please, don't let him kill me." Those were the words my daughter whispered into the phone the night everything changed. Even now, I can still hear the terror in her voice. Behind her came the sound of breaking glass, shouting, and the kind of fear no parent ever forgets. 10 minutes later, I was kneeling on my son-in-law Derek's back, holding him still while sheriff's deputies rushed into the house. He screamed that I had attacked him. The deputies barely looked at him. Instead, one of them studied the way I restrained him, calm, controlled, without unnecessary force. "Sir," he asked quietly, "were you military?" I answered with only 4 words. "Retired Navy, that's all." I didn't mention the years in special operations. I didn't mention the wars or the men I buried. After enough loss, silence becomes easier than explaining. 3 months earlier, nobody in our family would have imagined things ending this way, especially Derek. He was 39, confident, successful, and always the loudest person in every room. When he married my daughter Emily, I wanted to believe he was the right man for her. After my wife Carol passed away from cancer, Emily became the center of my world. Seeing her smile again made me ignore things that should have worried me. His drinking. His constant need to be right. The way he interrupted her before she finished speaking. And the nervous smile she wore whenever he made jokes at her expense. I convinced myself every marriage had rough seasons. That was my first mistake. I'm Walter Hayes, 68 years old, a retired widower, living in a quiet coastal town in North Carolina. Most people know me as the old man who fixes lawnmowers, drinks black coffee every Thursday morning, and walks his Labrador, Duke. That's all they see. They don't see the 26 years I spent serving my country, and I preferred it that way. The first time I realized something was seriously wrong happened during Thanksgiving 2 years earlier. Emily accidentally overcooked the turkey. It wasn't ruined, just a little dry. Derek carved a slice, laughed loudly, and announced to everyone, "Good thing you're pretty, because you're definitely not winning any cooking competitions." People forced polite smiles. Emily laughed too, but I noticed her shoulders tense before anyone else reacted. Years of military service taught me to pay attention to tiny reactions. Tiny reactions reveal the truth. After that, I watched more carefully. At Christmas, he mocked the sweater she wore. At Easter, he embarrassed her in front of family, because she'd forgotten ice for the cooler. Whenever she told a story, he interrupted to correct her. The insults weren't dramatic. They were small, constant cuts. And every time she smiled through them, I became more concerned. One summer evening, I invited them over for a backyard barbecue. Nothing special. Just burgers, corn, and neighbors enjoying a warm evening. Derek had clearly been drinking before he arrived. While I stood at the grill, he laughed and said, "You're the quietest retired military guy I've ever met." I smiled. Retirement changes people. He wasn't finished. "So what did you actually do? Push paperwork?" A few people laughed awkwardly. I simply shrugged. "Something like that." He pointed his beer bottle toward me. "Emily acts like you're some kind of action hero." Emily immediately looked uncomfortable. "Derek, stop. I'm just joking," he replied. Then he leaned closer. "I think most old military stories are exaggerated anyway." The backyard became silent. I turned another burger without saying a word. That irritated him more than any argument could have. Men like Derek feed on reactions. When they don't get one, they feel powerless. A little later, Emily came inside to help me carry dishes. For the first time that evening, we were alone. She quietly whispered, "I'm sorry." As she reached for a plate, I noticed a bruise near her wrist, partly hidden beneath makeup. My stomach tightened. What happened? She instantly pulled down her sleeve. "Nothing. Emily." She avoided my eyes. "Dad, please." It wasn't anger in her voice. It was fear. And in that moment, I knew enough. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my garage. Rain tapped softly against the roof while Duke slept beside my chair. I opened an old storage chest filled with memories from another life. Service medals, photographs, challenge coins, and one small laminated card. Emergency communication codes. When Emily was 16, I'd taught her a few simple phrases she could use if she was ever in danger but couldn't speak freely. Back then, she laughed and called it one of my paranoid military habits. Still, I made her promise one thing. If you ever use the real distress code, I'll come immediately. No questions asked. I prayed she would never need it. I had no idea that promise was about to be tested. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Emily appeared on the screen. "Dad, can you send me Mom's peach pie recipe?" To anyone else, it looked completely ordinary. To me, it meant only one thing. She was in immediate danger. For 2 seconds, I stared at the screen. Then 26 years of military training took over. Everything became calm, focused, cold. I called 911 as I grabbed my truck keys and headed into the storm. While driving, the dispatcher asked me to wait for the deputies. "I can't," I answered quietly. "My daughter is inside." She asked if I was armed. "Yes," I replied. "The firearm is locked in my truck, and I pray I won't need it." People think old soldiers are eager for violence. They're wrong. Most of us spend the rest of our lives trying to avoid it. When I reached Emily's neighborhood, I could already hear shouting from outside the house. The downstairs lights were on. As I moved closer, I looked through the window. Emily was backed against the kitchen counter. Her lip was bleeding. Broken glass covered the floor. Derek was screaming inches from her face, while gripping her wrist so tightly she could barely pull away. Then he shoved her. Not hard enough to knock her down. Hard enough to remind her that he could. That was all I needed to see. I quietly entered through the unlocked patio door. Neither of them noticed me at first. Emily suddenly looked past Derek. Her frightened eyes widened. "Dad." Derek turned around with a drunken grin. "Well, look who showed up." I kept walking toward him without raising my voice. "Step away from my daughter." He laughed. "Or what?" I repeated myself. "Step away from her." Instead, he took 2 aggressive steps toward me. That was his final mistake. The instant he lunged, years of training returned without a single conscious thought. I redirected his arm, shifted my weight, turned behind him, and brought him safely to the floor before he could throw a punch. The entire movement lasted only seconds. He never even understood what happened. I secured his wrist behind his back with controlled pressure. Enough to stop him. Not enough to injure him. He struggled furiously. "Get off me." "Stop resisting," I said calmly. Emily stood frozen nearby, crying into her hands. Derek kept shouting that I was hurting him. "No," I answered evenly. "You're restrained." Moments later, flashing blue lights filled the living room. 2 sheriff's deputies rushed inside with their weapons drawn. I slowly released one hand and raised mine. "The victim is safe," I said. "The suspect is restrained." The older deputy looked at me for a long second. He wasn't studying my face. He was studying my behavior. The calm breathing. The controlled movements. The discipline. "You military?" he finally asked. "Retired Navy." He nodded with quiet understanding. The younger deputy handcuffed Derek, while Emily admitted through tears that he had assaulted her. That single sentence changed everything. As the deputies led Derek away, Emily collapsed into my arms. I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, just as I used to, when she was a little girl frightened by thunderstorms. "It's over," I whispered. "You're safe now." For the first time in years, she believed those words. Emily moved into my house after Derek's arrest. The first few days were painfully quiet. She barely spoke. She apologized constantly. One morning over coffee, she looked at me and whispered, "I'm sorry for dragging you into this." I shook my head. "You have nothing to apologize for." Tears filled her eyes. "I should have left sooner." Maybe, I answered gently. But fear convinces good people to stay far longer than they should. She stared into her coffee before quietly saying something that broke my heart. I didn't want you to think I failed. I couldn't answer for a moment. After Carol died, I had buried myself in work, repairs, and routine instead of grief. Without realizing it, I'd become emotionally distant. Maybe Emily had been protecting me just as much as she'd been hiding from Derek. A few days later, she finally told me everything. The insults, the isolation, the controlling behavior, the apologies after every outburst, the first shove, the promises that it would never happen again. Then the cycle repeating over and over. I kept believing he'd change, she whispered. I nodded slowly. That's what abusers want you to believe. Then she reached into her purse and handed Detective Sarah Bennett a small flash drive. I started recording our arguments months ago. The detective listened carefully. The recordings captured Derek screaming, objects breaking, and finally one chilling sentence. If your father ever gets involved, he'll regret it. Detective Bennett closed the laptop and looked directly at Emily. What you did wasn't wrong. You were trying to survive. For the first time, I saw a little of the guilt leave my daughter's face. But I also knew our hardest battle was still ahead. The courtroom was waiting. The courtroom was packed on the morning of Derek's hearing. Emily sat beside me, quietly holding a paper cup of coffee with both hands. She looked stronger than she had weeks earlier, but healing doesn't happen overnight. Some days she smiled. Other days, the memories came rushing back. When Derek walked into the courtroom, he looked different. The expensive suits were gone. So was the confidence. But the bitterness was still there. His attorney tried to paint him as the victim, arguing that I had used unnecessary force and attacked an innocent husband. The prosecutor didn't seem impressed. Evidence speaks louder than excuses. The jury saw photographs of Emily's injuries. They heard the recordings she had secretly made. Then they watched the deputy's body camera footage from the night I entered the house. There I was, calmly restraining Derek without striking him. No rage, no revenge, only control. The defense's argument collapsed almost immediately. Then Derek made things even worse. He took the stand and blamed everyone except himself. The alcohol, his stress, his marriage, even Emily. Finally, he looked toward me and said, "Her father turned her against me." Before anyone else could respond, Emily slowly stood. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew stronger. "My father didn't turn me against him," she said. "He saved my life." The courtroom became completely silent. Emily described years of emotional abuse, constant humiliation, fear, and the feeling of disappearing inside her own marriage. Then she said something that I will never forget. I stopped recognizing the woman I used to be. That sentence hurt more than anything I'd ever heard on a battlefield. During a recess, the prosecutor quietly approached me. "You served in special warfare, didn't you?" I smiled slightly. "How could you tell?" "My brother was military," she replied. "Your self-control that night protected your daughter. If you had acted out of anger instead of discipline, this case could have become much more complicated." She was right. Real strength isn't losing control. It's keeping it. 6 weeks later, the court gathered for sentencing. That morning, I opened the attic and removed my old Navy dress uniform. I hadn't worn it since my wife's funeral. As I pinned each medal back onto my jacket, memories returned. Friends who never came home, folded flags, and sacrifices that shaped my entire life. When I entered the courtroom, everyone turned to look. Even Emily smiled through her tears. "I've never seen you wear that," she whispered. I simply nodded. Inside, the judge reviewed the evidence before asking whether I wished to speak. I slowly stood. "I spent most of my life surrounded by violence," I began. "And one lesson never changed." I looked toward Derek. "Real strength isn't making people fear you. It's protecting those who can't protect themselves." The courtroom remained silent. Then I added something even I hadn't expected to say. I don't hate Derek. Emily looked at me in surprise. I hate what he chose to become. But hatred only creates more damage if we keep feeding it. I'm asking this court for accountability, not revenge. The judge nodded. Derek was sentenced to prison, ordered into alcohol treatment and domestic violence rehabilitation, and permanent protective orders were issued for Emily and our family. As deputies led him away, Derek stopped at the courtroom door. He looked back at Emily. With tears in his eyes, he quietly said, "I'm sorry." Emily didn't answer. She simply held my hand. And for the first time in years, there was no fear in her eyes. Life slowly found its way back to us. Emily found a small apartment, returned to work at the public library, and began rebuilding the life Derek had nearly destroyed. One afternoon, she admitted, "I thought everyone would judge me for staying." I gently stirred my coffee before answering. Most people who have lived long enough understand that everyone carries invisible battles. Months later, my grandson Noah finally spent weekends with me again. While we fished together by the lake, he looked up and asked, "Why was Dad so mean to Mom?" I thought for a moment before answering. "Because some people mistake love for ownership." He quietly nodded. Then I handed him the fishing rod. "You know what real strength is." "What?" "Making people feel safe when they're with you." He smiled. And somehow, I knew he understood. Not long afterward, Emily received a handwritten letter from Derek in prison. There were no excuses, only regret. He admitted his drinking, his need for control, and the damage he had caused. After reading it, Emily asked, "Do you forgive him?" I folded the letter carefully. "I don't know yet. Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's something we choose again and again." She nodded. Then she quietly said, "Thank you for saving me." I smiled and gently shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You saved yourself the moment you asked for help. That took courage." A few Sundays later, our family gathered around my old kitchen table once again. Emily smiled freely. Noah laughed without fear. The house finally felt like a home again. And sitting there, I realized something that had taken me nearly 70 years to understand. When I was young, I thought strength meant winning fights. War taught me that strength meant surviving pain. But growing older taught me the greatest lesson of all. Strength is answering the phone when someone is terrified. Strength is staying calm when anger feels easier. Strength is protecting the people you love without losing your humanity. And no matter your age, it is never too late to choose kindness over control, peace over pride, and love over fear.